Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is extraordinary support in extraordinary times. It's the knowledge and expertise to harness opportunities. Can do is empowering you to get your plans back on track. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
It's the week ending Saturday the 27th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Liverpool reeling from the fatal shooting of a 9-year-old girl in her own home, barristers in England and Wales voting to strike from September, and millions of Britney Spears fans sharing a snippet of her first single since her conservatorship came to an end. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Julia O'Driscoll. From the Week magazine, it's Leaf Arbuthnot. And we have the host of and we welcome back the host of the Refugee podcast, Integrate That, Abdulwahab Tahhan. And Abdul, you are up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Blaming mass shooting on mental health is crazy.
After weeks of seeing the killer's deeds in vivid detail and heartbreaking testimony from victims, jurors are now asked to focus on the killer, not his crimes.
People are not crimes. People commit crimes, but we must understand the person behind the crime.
Melissa McNeil, the defense attorney representing school shooter Nicholas Cruz, speaking in court this week. Abdul, what's the story?
Well, the story is the lawyers of the gunman who carried out the mass shooting of a Parkland school in Florida on Valentine's Day in 2018, killing 17 people. The lawyer asked the jury to spare him the death penalty on the ground that his brain was irretrievably damaged and broken owing to difficult childhood problems. The lawyer claims that when he was in his mom's womb, that his mom was addicted to alcohol and drugs, and that made him a broken person. But this is not a new thing. The problem is here that every time when there's a mass shooting, whether it is in the US or in Europe, mental health illness is blamed. However, psychologists disagree with this, and a number of them have come out and say that clinical diagnosis and the type of emotional disturbance before the mass shooting are completely two different animals. So blaming only mental health issues or mental health illness for mass murders is kind of outdated and not acceptable anymore.
But her job obviously is to persuade a jury, isn't it, Abdul? And it's not even that she has to persuade all the jury, of course. She just has to persuade one of them not to send him to the death penalty, and he won't get the death penalty. So regardless of what the science says, I guess, about the link, cause and effect, if she can show this is a very damaged man, he's had a very difficult life, he's not someone who's in his right mind, you can understand why she would be trying to sway one of the jury to think, actually, it's not fair to sentence him to death.
Well, of course, she will try to do that because actually, if you look at the statistics, according to Mind, a charity here in the UK that looks after mental health issues, in their study, in their report, they say that 1 in 4 people in the UK have mental health issues. And I think 6 out of 100 on any given week will experience some anxiety and depression and mental health problems. And almost half of the Americans through their lives will go through mental health issues. However, that doesn't mean that every one of these people will go ahead and commit mass murders. So the idea is that people, have mental health issues and problems does not mean that they are going to kill people. This is not a good indicator. So, this defense is not really that strong.
Julia, how do you prove that someone's brain is broken, to use the word that she used in court?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that hasn't really been laid out. There was a previous case of another mass shooter, Adam Lanza, who was the perpetrator of the Sandy Hook mass shooting. And scientists tried to sequence his DNA. And to quote the New Yorker article that came out around the time, this was back in about 2012, the scientists were looking to see if they can find anomalies that might explain what was broken in him. This word broken coming up again, it just feels really, yeah, really complicated. And there isn't a way to. And experts really are saying that there is no consistent pattern when it comes to looking at people who commit mass shootings. And rather than trying to identify some kind of common trait in terms of mental health, it's much better to focus on warning signs. So, for example, in this case, the mass shooter had said before that he intended to inflict violence and that he could inflict more violence than previous mass shooters. And so that should have been the focus, really, in terms of actually stopping the event from happening.
And we're in the strange position now, aren't we, Leaf, where curiously in the United States, some people in the gun lobby who you might think would be the gang who would back the death penalty most strongly, those people actually kind of want to prove that it's mental health that lurks behind mass shootings, because if they do that, then the solution is a few more mental health checks when you buy a gun, rather than a wider ban on guns.
Yeah, I mean, I think the politics are so frozen on this issue. Well, I mean, although we've recently had a big gun bill, but they're still relatively frozen. And the idea that there's going to be some kind of, big federal gun control act that actually has teeth and that meaningfully reduces the number of guns in the US is fanciful. I think what's really interesting about this case is that it's clear that this guy, this killer, did have a very difficult upbringing, and his sister testified to the fact that their mother was, an addict and was always putting her addiction first. There was a teacher who recalled him pushing kids over when he was just 4. So I feel a bit more wobbly about this than Abdul maybe, because he wasn't shown, he doesn't seem to have been shown any love as a child. He might well have had this alcohol kind of problem when he was in the womb because of his mother's drinking. And while I think it's we're on a slippery slope if we just let people off because they've had a really tough time in life, I think there is actually quite a lot of evidence here that the sort of environment in which he grew up was not one that would produce a healthy person.
I suppose the point is, Abdul, it's you were suggesting that what the lawyer's trying to say is that everyone who's had this background would go on to become a mass shooter. Whereas actually what she's arguing for is he should go to prison for life, but he shouldn't be sentenced to death for something that was beyond his control, which is what happened to him in the womb.
Yeah, she was trying to get the less severe punishment and the easier one, which is sentence to life in prison. But again, based on the fact that he had mental health issues and problems, and this is a problematic here because if we start to stigmatize mental health issues and connect it to violence and killing, a lot of people will not seek help. I arrived in the UK coming from war, and I went and talked to people who helped me, in when I arrived, because I really needed help, and I did not have any shame talking about it. But we look in at the attacks that happened in Reading, where 3 people were dead in 2020, 2 years ago. It was by a guy coming from Libya who had mental health issues. Now, both of us were refugees. Both of us had mental health issues, and both of us seek help. But that doesn't mean every single refugee who comes and has a mental health issues is going to go out and commit such heinous crimes. This is my objection, is that by trying to say that this guy, this killer, had mental health issues, we're vilifying mental illness and preventing people from getting help or seeking help.
Is it preventing people, Julia? I mean, if anything, it's saying to every criminal who's in prison, look back through your history and be more honest about your mental health problems, because it might help get you off the hook.
But I think this issue of people with mental health issues being stigmatized and potentially people jumping to conclusions is a really important one that Abdul's pulled out. And yeah, I think it could be really, really problematic. But then going back to what you were saying, Olly, earlier, the defense lawyer has to come up with a defense, and this is an incredibly common one that people go to. So I don't think that we're going to see an end to this being something that lawyers do end up kind of relying on as a defense, particularly when the stakes are so high in terms of life imprisonment or the end of a life. It just raises the bar so high.
And you mentioned some of the telltale signs that might hint that someone is about to embark upon a mass shooting. Leakages, I've seen them called. What are they? What else has been identified?
So people have said that kind of changes in behavior, demeanor, appearance are things to look for, as well as uncharacteristic arguments. And obviously, as I was saying earlier, literally telling people that you plan to commit violence. And experts have also said there are kind of other factors that motivate people in mass shootings. So one being like a desire for fame, but also radicalization on the internet.
Yeah, and what's your sense, Leaf, that those things are being combated, in terms of law or support?
It's a huge kind of societal problem. The kind of further out you go, the more you realise that it takes sort of societal change for those factors to be addressed, especially the case with some of these shooters spending a lot of their time pickling in quite extreme online groups. It's quite difficult to stop, teenage boys, some of them are teenagers, these mass killers, from spending their time online. And sometimes, I worry that these shootings, although they always come out of an individual's circumstance, they also do reflect a society that there are weaker bonds between individuals, and that people can be sort of forgotten about. There's been interesting work with people who have perpetrated these killings before, and a lot of them have said, I could have been stopped. If someone had kind of reached out to me, that might have stopped me from doing it. And it's not necessarily a big mental health intervention would have stopped them. It's more kind of sometimes, a caring conversation.
I suppose the thing is, Abdul, that it's the court's job to discuss at length what someone's motivation is and how things happened. But people are always looking for an easy answer to a question like, why do we have so many mass shootings in America? And I suppose looking at mental health sort of obfuscates one of the other answers, which is because you've got a load of problems in your society that have led to this. It's not just one thing. And a lot of the people who do mass shootings appear to have no psychiatric problems. And it's something that is happening in your society very regularly, more than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, and there's a lot of blame game happening here. The psychologists all blaming the teachers for not picking up these signs. Someone saying that I'm going to kill someone or being bullied, and then the teachers blame the gun lobby for making guns available to kids, to people without checks. The gun lobby will blame the psychiatrists and psychologists for not properly taking care of these kids and these patients and not finding something to cure them, right? And to take care of their problems. So there's a lot of blames in here, but at the end of the day, whenever we see mass shootings happening, most of the time they're happening in a country where there are a lot of guns. We have to admit that we don't have a lot of guns in the UK. We have very, very few guns, and we don't have these problems.
Regardless of what you think of the death penalty, Julia, since they have it in Florida, isn't it just on the face of it rather ridiculous to be arguing whether this man is eligible? He has pled guilty to murdering 17 people. And if you don't have the death penalty for that, what do you have it for?
Yeah, I think that is a really good point, that essentially that is why it exists. But as we said earlier, defense lawyer does have to defend, and I guess we'll see what happens next.
It's easy to disagree for a lot of people. It's easy for a lot of people to disagree with the death penalty when they've been just reading about events in the news, but they haven't lost people, or they haven't lost a child to a mass shooting, or haven't lost a loved one due to a mass shooting. So it's completely different. I would have understand people's opposition to death penalty before 2012, but again, I always bring back my experience in here. And, after seeing a lot of killing in Syria and a lot of people committing crimes and killing other people, I wouldn't really oppose it as a kind of a closure and bringing justice to a community and society.
Julia, I'm coming to you next after this.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is extraordinary support in extraordinary times. It's the knowledge and expertise to harness opportunities. Can do is empowering you to get your plans back on track. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
Okay, Julia, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week should be remembered for thousands of stories of separation.
It's so easy to take for granted, like maybe the ways in which adoption has critically shaped your identity. But in Korea, you have to confront it every day.
I felt like there was some part of me that was missing that I needed to come to Korea to get.
I think being adopted can prompt a lot of curiosity and questioning that is actually really aligned with philosophical inquiry.
It's like I'm slowly uncovering this big fossil, like I'm kind of slowly uncovering what was lost through adoption day by day.
The video, These Korean Adoptees Are Returning to Their Birth Country to Stay. You can watch the whole thing on Vice Asia's YouTube channel. Julia, what's the story?
So this week, a group of 53 people who were born in South Korea but were adopted as children by parents and families in Denmark have submitted an application to authorities in South Korea calling on them to investigate the circumstances around their adoption. 53 people obviously doesn't sound like a lot of people, but the Al Jazeera report that really caught my attention said that if this application goes through, it could trigger the most far-reaching inquiry into foreign adoptions in South Korea, which has never truly come to terms with the country's child export frenzy engineered by past military governments.
So what do these 53 people have in common then, apart from the fact they were adopted by mostly white parents in Denmark and they're from South Korea? What else do they suspect they have in common?
So members of the group believe that they were carelessly or unnecessarily adopted, and they think that this was due to loose government monitoring and a lack of due diligence during a period. So I should say this is kind of after the Korean War, from kind of the late 1950s for kind of the following 60 years, really booming in the 1980s. South Korea, so a lot of children being adopted by families overseas, primarily in the US, but also in countries in Europe, and Denmark was one main country.
And to be clear, one of the things they're alleging is my national papers and my adoptive parents were told that my parents were dead, that I was an orphan, but I wasn't.
Yes, so that is the thing that really unites these people, is that they believe they were adopted, but they weren't orphans.
I mean, that is genuinely just such a shocking and distressing thing to read, isn't it, Leaf? I'm trying to get my head around how that situation happened, because obviously after the Korean War, there would have been a lot of desire to find parents for genuine orphans, and it would have been really welcome that parents in countries like the United States and Denmark stepped in. But then what happened? It sort of kickstarted an industry, or what?
It's interesting, actually. The Korean War, initial waves of adoptees that especially went to America were children that had been fathered by American servicemen in this war, which is between 1950 and 1953, between North and South Korea. And so these children were kind of brought back to America and brought up in kind of predominantly, well, in white households. But then over the years, it became more of a phenomenon where sort of fully Korean children were taken in by American families who, in some cases, thought that they were, well, most cases, didn't have the full story behind what was going on. And some families had been told that they were adopting, a child that had been found on the streets, an orphan. And so they were very keen to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. And actually, what I'm really struck by is the actual scale of this. It seems that about 200,000 Koreans have been adopted overseas over the past 60 years. And I've read that represents between 20 and 25% of all transnational adoptions globally, which is extraordinary when you think, the kind of general images of Madonna going to Africa and adopting children there. But actually, Korea, which is, not a massive place, South Korea, is responsible for a large number of children that have ended up being adopted overseas.
And what's incredible, Abdul, is that these people have only become aware that they have this issue in common, if you like, because of the internet, basically. There are Facebook groups, etc., for people who know they're Korean of birth but were brought up in different countries, and now they've all realised they have similar stories and they have similar questions around their paperwork.
Yeah, because of social media, you can connect with a lot of people. So it's only fitting that these people would find some relatives or would find some people who knew them by simply just digging online and seeing who they are, because they know that they were adopted, right? So some of them looked for relatives and found some relatives. Some of them knew that they had some shared people, just looking up their names. And this is a problem because when this happened back in the 70s and 80s, when most of the export started in the 70s and 80s, most of these people were supposedly orphans on the streets, right? They didn't have any parents. And as one of these activists said, by just looking at the math and doing some simple math, over 200,000 people, meaning that Seoul was full of orphans on the streets in baskets, which is mind-boggling and doesn't comprehend. So by doing just simple math online, you can find a lot of people who have the same share interests or similar interests, and one people can lead you to a lot of different leads.
And Julia, the effects of being adopted at all are known to be more likely to trigger, psychological issues for anybody, even if they know that their birth parents are still alive and they know who they are. They just naturally are more likely to have identity issues, of course, than someone who hasn't been adopted. And then when you add on to that being a transnational adoptee, someone of a different colour in a different nation, that brings with it a whole range of other issues as well, doesn't it? Before you even account for the fact that they might not have been orphans in the first place and they've been lied to about their families.
Yeah, absolutely. Reading about people's first-hand experiences of this is really quite emotive. People describe feeling racial isolation, obviously questioning their identity, and also having kind of physical bodily memories of separation trauma. So people who have been separated also often suffer from complex PTSD. So a real kind of range of different physical and mental challenges, but also people who have experienced this really struggle to find kind of the help that they need to navigate it, struggling to find therapists or trained professionals who are able to help them because it is such a kind of specific situation.
Do you think we can take some comfort, Leaf, that this sort of thing couldn't happen now? I mean, these are historic cases going back to the 80s.
Yeah, I think we've made progress in this area, and South Korea has passed about 10 years ago, passed a special adoption law that was meant to add a lot of accountability and sort of oversight by the government to the process. Now, the law requires mothers to wait at least 7 days before they give up a child, which in my view sounds actually quite extreme. Also to get approval from a family court and various other things. One of the interesting aspects of this is that I looked up whether a lot of these Korean babies ended up in the UK, and it seems that actually very few came to the UK, or at least to England, because local authorities were quite strict about where they were kind of getting adoptees from. So it's also an issue. It's not just that South Korea was kind of exporting high numbers of these children. It's also that some countries, especially the US, there was a real market for them, and they weren't asking perhaps probing enough questions.
Yeah, which comes back to bite you perhaps 40 or 50 years later. That's the thing, isn't it, Abdul? You've got people who are adults, and the people who made the decision to send them away to another country or to falsify their paperwork might be dead.
That's true, but we need to learn from these processes. Just because something happened in the 80s or 70s doesn't mean that the current government cannot come out and do the right thing and apologize. A lot of things happened in the past, but then the governments came out and apologized. An example of this is the handling of Jimmy Savile, with the BBC, which was horrendous. And then, there was an inquiry into it, and, an apology came later. So that's the only right thing to do. So the first thing to do in here, in order to learn from this lesson, is to open an inquiry and help these people, who filed the suit to find the answers they're looking for.
But this might just be the tip of the iceberg, Julia. I mean, it's quite interesting that it's Denmark, isn't it, where this is coming from, which is, pretty progressive country and one probably quite inclined to apologise quite quickly for this sort of thing. But, this could lead to the United States and Canada, and that is a whole different kettle of fish legally.
Absolutely. Phil Sikshin, who's a scholar in South Korea, said that if the commission does go ahead and conduct an inquiry, its findings could later be used by adoptees in possible damage suits against agencies and the government. So this could really be huge. And we were talking earlier about kind of how the internet has allowed people to connect and find these communities. These communities are huge. I read one statistic that said they think across several combined Facebook groups in the US, that's 30,000 members. So once there's a precedent set and there are lawyers who are ready to kind of take legal action, it could have a huge impact for so many thousands of individuals.
Okay, fascinating. Leaf, you're up next after this. Okay, Leaf, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is your doppelganger out there?
All right, now we are going to turn to a story that caught our eye this morning. It's all about doppelgangers. The New York Times highlights a new study that finds many of us have virtual twins out there somewhere. But here's where it gets weird. The study compared the DNA of unrelated doppelgangers, no family history whatsoever, and found many of them were similar all the way down to their genetics.
NBC's Today Show reporting on Wednesday this week. And Leaf, this story has its roots in a sort of photographer's passion project, doesn't it?
Yeah, this Canadian photographer decided to start taking pictures of people who look really alike because he realised that he himself had a doppelganger, the actor Rowan Atkinson. And in the 2000s, he launched this project where he started taking very beautiful black and white pictures of two people who are not related but look freakishly alike, sort of pulling similar poses.
Okay, so if people are listening and they want to press pause and they immediately want to check these photos out whilst they listen, what's the name of the photographer? What's it called?
You need to look up Francois Brunel doppelgangers.
Yeah, so the photo series is called I'm Not a Lookalike. And what he's done over the years, he's been doing this for a long time, hasn't he, is he's taken pictures of people from different parts of the world who aren't related and posed them together. And you're supposed to think, looking at this, wow, they're just like identical twins. And some of them do look alike.
They all look alike. Some of them look alike so much that you're convinced that it's a sort of mirror image. And this project caught the attention of some scientists in Barcelona who wanted to look at the actual genes of these people to work out if the kind of resemblances were more than sort of skin deep. And 32 pairs of doppelgangers agreed to take part in this study. And then they used facial recognition software to basically analyse the pairs and establish how similar they were. 16 of the pairs were deemed to be so similar that they were basically identical twins in their appearance. And DNA tests of these uber lookalikes revealed that they also shared DNA. I mean, they were genetically really quite similar. There were all sorts of other resemblances as well, which we can get into maybe.
Yeah. So this is quite interesting, isn't it, Abdul? Because, as I say, these are people from completely different sides of the world that have no known ancestor in common. So if they do share DNA, it's something that's happened either in isolation or many, many, many generations ago, and yet you can still see it in their faces.
Well, there are so many ways in order to construct a face, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there are two eyes, one nose, one mouth. And then there's not a lot of ways in order to construct a lot of different faces at the end of the day. So it's not like it's impossible to happen. It's bound to happen. We are over 7 billion people on Earth. We somehow share DNA with a lot of people who moved around, and with because of colonies, and Syria, for example, was previous colony. Most of the world was a British colony at one day. So we share a lot of genes already. And if you take any DNA test, you see that you share genes with people from countries you've never been in your life, and you've never heard your grandfather been there. So it's either the milkman who's traveling a lot around, or it's just pure a coincidence.
Were you struck, Julia, by how similar these people looked? Because you can hear that I'm a bit sceptical. I must say, I looked at this photo series. I'm not sure. I mean, what the photographer's done, and he's taken photos where people have the same hair, the same glasses, the same shirt, and then got them to do the same pose, and then done it in black and white. So yeah, of course they look alike. But some of them are like a foot different in height. I'm not sure that it's that uncanny, really.
The fact they were styled in a way that looked similar, like the glasses they wore were similar and everything, obviously didn't help. And there were some quite big limitations to this study. So obviously, as we said, black and white photos were used, which meant that the facial recognition software couldn't get valuable information on like the 3D elements of the face, and skin tone subtleties. And also the participants were largely of European origin. So you wouldn't be able to say that these findings would also be true of other human populations. That said, I follow an Instagram account called Siblings or Dating. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that.
I think we know what it might be about.
It is incredible how many people do. Abdul's looking confused. Okay, so Siblings or Dating is this Instagram account where they post different pictures several times a day of a pair of people who look remarkably similar, and then the followers vote whether they think they are siblings or whether they're dating, and then there's a big reveal. And I mean, just for the amount of content that this account has managed to put out, it is incredible how many people do look incredibly similar. So I guess in terms of like actual DNA, maybe, you know, it's quite limited, but in terms of just to the naked eye, to me and many other Instagram followers, there are lots of similarities.
Yeah, well, that thing, Leaf, is about how people are attracted to, I mean, in the cases where they're dating, to people that look a bit like them or they could be related to them, which is another dimension to this, i.e., I can't work out how the participants in these photographs met each other. Have you managed to find any evidence of that? Like, how did he put these photos together? Because I presume they met in the real world and then thought, oh, we look kind of similar, and then saw his call for people that have had that situation, in which case that shows they were drawn to each other because they looked a bit like each other as friends.
I don't know exactly how he found all of the people. I've seen some sort of interesting occurrences of this happening in the wild. For instance, there's a funny photo of two guys who sat on a plane next to each other, and they do look really similar. And you know, and you can see everyone like smiling in the background in the rows behind them. Everyone's clearly delighted that these doppelgangers have sat next to each other. But there are also, you know, with the internet, it seems that people who look really similar are finding each other with ever greater ease. It has to be said that having a doppelganger isn't always a brilliant thing. There was an interesting case in the US where this man called Richard A. Jones, who was convicted of aggravated robbery after being picked out of a lineup by witnesses who had said that he stole a cell phone in a Walmart parking lot. He got sentenced to 19 years. And eventually some inmates started telling him, you look a lot like another prisoner called Ricky. And it turned out that he hadn't committed the crime at all, but that Ricky actually had. And so then he was released after 17 years. He'd first gone to jail age 25. And he ended up getting over $1 million in damages. So while it's fun to find someone who looks like your twin, it's maybe not fun if your twin has been committing crimes that you'll end up behind bars for.
Can someone give us some scientific data to take away with us? What have they actually found? Because it's about specific types of genomes and stuff, isn't it?
Slightly alarming when I volunteered to do a science bit, but we'll give it a go. So the scientists found that DNA in the genome is incredibly similar, so that, you know, the people in this study shared around 20,000 genetic variations between them. So that's looking at the shape of their mouth, lips, body fat, liquid retention, which is quite impressive from a photo. But then they did also find that epigenomes, which are genes that can be switched on or off as a result of a lived experience, and microgenomes, so that's the thing that kind of manages the kind of bacteria, viruses, all of that in your body, those were different. So the researchers had thought that environmental factors were going to play a bigger part in why these people look similar, but they found that actually it wasn't that. It was purely the genome that was responsible.
Yeah, I remember a couple of weeks ago we ran a piece we ran a story here about smells and how strangers who can identify the same smell are attracted to each other and find each other pleasant, or their best friends kind of can smell them. So this is a little bit similar because in the story in here, that some of these doppelgangers, some of these doppelgangers did not notice that they look alike. People around them told them, oh, you look similar to this guy, or you look similar to this woman. So they didn't really know that they look like each other, but they were attracted to each other. So that's one of the difference, that we are attracted to people who are similar to us, whether we consciously or subconsciously.
Well, there you are, Leaf. Abdul's comparing your story selection to perhaps the most frivolous story that we've run on this show this year, and there's some hot competition. Can you reassure us that this is important?
I think it's important. It's also interesting to note that maybe if you see someone who looks exactly like you, there might be a fairly strong chance that you'll share sort of traits such as some of these Uber lookalikes were more likely to be smokers or non-smokers. Both of them, they're more likely to be left or right-handed, to enjoy or avoid sports. So next time you see someone who looks freakishly like you, I would get into conversation because you might have a bit in common.
My father was an uncanny resemblance for Elliot Gould. And my mum bumped into him once at a party and went up to him and she said, "Everyone says you look like my husband." And he turned around to my mum and he said, "I think you'll find your husband looks like me." Do you have a celebrity doppelganger? Any of you been confused for someone famous?
Yes, someone. I once turned up at an Airbnb in Texas, and they thought I was Bonnie Wright from Harry Potter, and they were convinced.
Julia?
I have had Jennifer Lawrence from people who are definitely trying to be nice to me, and then
actually, I wouldn't have ever thought it, but now you say it. There's something Lawrenceian about you.
Well, thank you, Ollie. That's a huge compliment. But from people who see me more often, not on a podcast recording, I more frequently get Michael McIntyre.
I can see that too.
Oh my God.
You are the Lawrence McIntyre mashup. Abdul?
Well, any bald guy with a hipster's beard might look like me.
Depending on what he's doing in his stage of life and what I'm doing in terms of my diet, I'm either thin or fat Seth Rogen, but we've rarely been at the same weight proportionally. Yeah,
I think Alexander Armstrong a bit as well.
Yes,
Ollie, if I may say.
I would back that too.
I'll take that. My thanks to Julia, Abdul and Leaf. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tapping follow. Remember too to check out our sister show from the week, The Overview. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Fat Seth Rogen at the moment, sadly. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.